Welcome, traveler, to my realm of nightmares. Allow me to be your personal assistant in my realm. Come in, take a seat, get comfortable, for when you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.
Downstairs in the butcher shop late at night, there is a blood-splattered machine hidden at a site. It is warm and pulsates and reeks of death, while it carves up a curious house mouse, drawing its last breath. It works and works to slice, dice, and grind all meats for hungry families to make burgers to eat. And while it does not sleep, it does breathe, while the butcher looks on and wipes fresh blood off of his sleeve. "Good work, Timmy," the butcher exclaims as he turns off the lights. "Do not let anything else stir in here tonight." While Timmy grinds the fresh meat, he winces in pain. He was caught by the butcher while he was playing a game. The butcher swooped in and grabbed Timmy from the street. Timmy was playing kick the can, and now he is grinding meat. He isn't the same little boy he was once before. The butcher turned him into something much, much more. The butcher drilled and cut and installed metal through his bone matter. He even took a hose and stuck it into his bladder. While Timmy was asleep, he fastened metal sheets. The butcher had created a machine that would give people good eats. Until a day came when Timmy was left alone one night. He caught from his one good eye a very strange sight. 3 unsuspecting teenagers came in through the window off the street. Timmy hid quietly in the shadows and prepared to ambush this strange new meat. Timmy was strong and Timmy was cunning. He scared the teens and they went running. They hid and cried and quietly said, "What the fuck was that?" Timmy hadn't had this much fun since he chased down his last alley cat. This is the story up until this point about the butcher and his flesh machine he did anoint. If you want to learn about the teens and their current rut, check out the story, The Perfect Cut. Shit! He's still chasing us? I can't believe how much stamina this old guy has. Trevor burst out laughing as I watched over my shoulder. This Chinese dude easily looked to be in his 60s, but he had been running after us for more than 5 street corners. Normally, they would give up the chase long before that. All of this running because we got the munchies, but didn't have any money? It was only, 3 or 4 bags of chips? And a couple Monster energy drinks? Had I known the guy would chase us like that, I would have chosen another corner store to shoplift. Not like there wasn't one every corner in Brooklyn anyway. "You're falling behind, Sam." Alex was right. I needed to up my running game if I didn't want the guy to catch up to us. We turned into an alleyway, threw our chips on the other side of the fence, and climbed it at the speed of light. The old geezer arrived a couple minutes after, but only slammed his hands against the fence in frustration as we picked up our stolen goods, gave him the middle finger, and dashed away. We could still hear him cursing in his native tongue as we slipped in the darkness of the alley and disappeared into the night. Mischief achieved. I slammed my fist against Trevor's shoulder and called him a dumbass. It was his idea to shoplift. I felt like my heart was about to burst out of my chest, not only because of the running, but because the old guy was scary. I'm sure if he had caught up to us, he would have beaten the piss out of us. As we kept walking, I could feel my shirt sticking to my skin. Running made me sweat, and the breeze made me shiver. I couldn't go back home to change either, as I told my folks I was going to sleep at Alex's. We planned to stay out for as long as we wanted, though Alex's parents worked the night shift in a factory downtown. So we were basically on our own. No way we were going to stay in all night, when we could stay out late and have a bit of fun. I did regret not bringing a jacket though. Nights in May were still fresh. "Let's break in." Trevor pointed at a street view window on what looked like a butcher shop. I knew the place because my parents sometimes liked to buy steak and sausage from the guy. I asked Trevor how he planned to get in exactly. I didn't mind the whole shoplifting chips and stuff, but breaking and entering was on a whole different level. Trevor's family was poor, very poor, mind you. This kind of stuff he did on the daily. For as long as I knew the guy, he always was tangled in some mess. His mother participated in 1,001 internet jobs, and his dad was the kind of man who ran after get-rich-quick schemes. He also did prison time for scamming the folks at a retirement home in the countryside by selling fake life insurance. So, for him, breaking and entering wasn't a huge deal. To me, however, it was way above petty theft and what my anxiety could handle. I didn't mind the occasional shoplifting, but I didn't have a mean bone in my body. Trevor called me a coward and walked towards a large green trash bin. There was an old broom handle in it. He quickly picked it up and walked back to us, as he proudly declared he wanted to test the alarm system. I checked around for cameras and didn't see any. As soon as he slammed the broomstick and broke the window, my heart jumped in my chest and I started to feel guilty. I told my friends we should go. This didn't set right with me. But since no alarms were sounding, Trevor cleaned up the glass around the window frame to make sure we could get in without getting cut. Then, without any further discussion or comments towards my willingness to proceed, he slipped into the broken window. Trevor called to us and told us it was warm in there. I looked back at Alex, who shrugged at me before following, as if saying it didn't matter anymore since what was done was done. I swallowed thickly, breathed deeply, gathered my nerves, and escaped my anxiety by reassuring that we would be okay. As I made my way in, I wasn't going to be the only one who didn't dare enter. Even if it didn't sit right with me, I wasn't going to leave my friends alone. Trevor was right. It was warm inside. Warm and humid even. And it smelled exactly like you would think a butcher's basement smelled like blood, steel, and something else that I didn't want to figure out what it was. The room we broke in looked like an office. There were exactly 2 chairs and a desk. So we all chose a spot to sit and lit up a joint. Now that it was warm, there wasn't any wind and an old Chinese man wasn't chasing after us. The conditions were stellar for smoking one. Plus, my anxiety really could use the downer that came with being high. Pot always made me feel at peace. We took a few drags and opened our chips, exchanging a joint with Dorito cheese-stained fingers. I didn't remember what we were joking about, but I knew Trevor laughed so hard he nearly fell off the desk. And then we heard it. It was like a scream, but it sounded metallic. Or, if you will, a scream trapped in a tin can and then hit with reverb and auto-tune blasted out a huge-ass speaker. It echoed through the whole building, and office we were in. My blood turned to ice, and I dropped my can of Monster on the ground. We all heard it, and my friends were making the same face I was. "The fuck was that?" Trevor was the first to reply. My brain was screaming at me to get out of there. Even if the joint had calmed me down and made me forget about my internal anxiety, that metallic screeching woke it back up as it had never left. The three of us stood in silence, expecting the scream to come back, but it didn't. After 3 minutes of waiting, with bated breath, Alex suggested that it might have been a machine. Maybe some screws were going loose and making the machine wince loudly. I felt creeped out, but it made sense. It could have been an old meat grinder or something. How could I know? I'm not an expert on butcher's tools and machinery. We all laughed about it for approximately 5 seconds before another loud noise had us holding our breath in fear. It sounded like chains and blades being dragged on the ground. They didn't seem to move closer or further, so we could only assume whatever was making that noise was rooted in its spot. I felt my mouth go dry and picked up my Monster can from the floor to take a sip at whatever hadn't spilled. My mind was hazy because of the joint, but I felt the telltale weight of my anxiety crushing my chest. "Oh, we should go," I said, my voice not quite as loud as I would have wished it was at the time. I sounded like a coward, and I knew it, but this feeling of trepidation creeping along the length of my spine didn't seem to let go. Every fiber in my body was screaming at me to get out while I still could, even if another part of me was piqued with curiosity about what was making that noise. I, however, didn't want to be the one to suggest we go check it out. Fortunately, I didn't have to. Trevor was quick to tell me to knock it off and that he wanted to know what it was. All we had to do was open the door and look in the other room. If anything turned out bad, we could always make it out of the same window. Alex didn't seem to have any qualms about whether we left or stayed, but he had always been more courageous than me. We decided to open the door and check. Just a glance, nothing more. Once we opened the door, we were disappointed. We couldn't see anything, of course. It was night, so all the lights had been turned off. Plus, it didn't seem like the next room was the one with whatever machine was making that dreadful noise. It looked like a hallway leading to a different room and a staircase that probably led up to the butcher shop. This place still looked a lot bigger than we expected. The butcher shop was relatively small, only a storefront with a few refrigerators. The basement looked about 13 times bigger. We walked down the hallway, opening all the doors that weren't locked on our way. On our left, most of the doors were locked. On our right, there was a locker room. We turned on the light and saw a few blood-stained aprons, work boots, and a bench in the middle. It almost looked like the locker room at our school, if only smaller and grimmer. We turned off the light and closed the door before continuing our exploration. Just as we were closing the door, we froze in our spots as that loud screaming tore through the atmosphere again. It was so high-pitched and close. It couldn't be just a machine. I swore I could hear a voice, a real human voice, in that abominable screeching. My hair stood on end, and my fight or flight response was triggered. And if I were honest with myself, I would have chosen flight this instant if I had been alone. Trevor, on the other hand, seemed almost thrilled because we were getting closer. There was a corner at the end of the hallway, and once we turned it, we saw a pair of mean-looking double doors. They were framed with iron, and I hoped they were locked. I felt like I was holding my breath and having an out-of-body experience as I walked towards the doors. I could hear the echo of my footsteps against the concrete floor and my breathing, but every other noise seemed to have been silenced. The sound of chains and metal dragging, making my hair stand on end. My curiosity was sated at this point, and I wanted nothing more than to dash out of this place. I couldn't even enjoy my high anymore. I was so tense that my buzz had pretty much been beaten down by adrenaline. I was about to say we shouldn't go into the charnel doors. I was getting overwhelmed by my crippling anxiety, and my feet refused to move. "It's open!" The two words I didn't want to hear at the moment. They resonated along the walls of the hallway and hit my eardrums with the intensity of speakers on max level. It made my heart skip a beat. It made my bones tremble. I swallowed thickly, but stood in silence as both Alex and Trevor opened the iron doors. Again, the sound of chains rattling and blades grinding on concrete reached me, rooting me on my spot. I couldn't stand it. I wanted to go. "There's nothing. See? We really should go," I said with a shaking voice. "Wait, what's that?" Trevor said. There was a tiny bit of light coming from a dirty street window. As Trevor's hand searched for the light switch, I tried to decipher what the hell I was seeing. There was a big lump of plastic and metal in the far corner of a huge room. There were also a few machines that looked like they had been left to gather dust. This room looked as though it served several purposes, such as storage for old, discarded machinery and a meat-cutting section. I could also see the outline of another set of double doors, though these looked more airtight. A cold room, maybe. Back to the lump of plastic and metal. It was covered in metal plating, and a knife was dangling slightly, and now I could hear that previous inaudible, incessant dragging of chains. Now and then the sound was more intense because the mess of plastic and steel moved faster, as if struggling. I knew it didn't make sense. Machines don't move on their own, but what I was looking at didn't seem to be entirely machine either. "Found it!" Trevor announced, victorious, as he flipped a switch. Unfortunately for him, all he managed was to turn on a fan that made a thunderous noise over our head. I stared up at the ceiling as loud bangs came from the ventilation system, and I screamed at him to turn it off. The thing screamed almost at the same time as me, essentially shutting me up. We were on the other side of the room, but the sound was so clear now that I instinctively put my hands on my ears. Trying to protect myself, I felt like the sound would pierce through my eardrums. Angry that his light switch wasn't one, Trevor abandoned his search and just decided to start walking across the room to get closer to the mass of plastic, metal, and chains. For a second, I admired his bravery. Then, I felt a fear gnawing at my insides. We shouldn't have been here. I heard Trevor ask, "What the fuck was that?" and call us to him. My feet moved against my will in his direction. The closer I got, the more I could make out of what I was seeing. But despite my eyes seeing more clearly, my brain didn't understand what I was looking at. I was looking at a hulking monstrosity of twisted plastic and grime-covered steel. I could see what looked like human flesh twisted in a tin can-looking enclosure, some parts swollen and darkened by necrosis. All I could think about was a fake internet news article which stated human flesh tasted like pork. As I walked closer, I could feel my heart beat at my throat, and the closer I got, the more I understood what I had smelled earlier. It wasn't only blood and metal, it was death. I smelled putrefied flesh, pus, and infection. It smelled like something was rotting. I didn't notice it when he opened the door because all the machines were stained with dried blood, but the closer I got, the more intense the stench. I had to cover my nose when I was a few inches away. The thing was wrapped in chains, and there were a few very large blades embedded in the creature. Besides the plastic and grime-covered steel, there were enough holes for us to peek into the thin can and see what it contained. But what was inside didn't look like anything more. It was swollen and pink, like exposed bloodied flesh, or darkened and yellowish oozing pus. And then I saw an eye. I saw an eye with a yellow sclera and almost white iris, looking at me from one of the holes. It saw me, and for some reason, I felt like I recognized that eye. But before I could jump out of my skin and run for my life, I heard that scream again. It made me fall to my knees, holding my head with my hands. I felt something warm soak my jeans, and when I looked down, I realized I'd knelt in the pool of half-congealed blood and pus. It was at that point when I heard Alex scream, and I realized I wasn't the only one who noticed. The monstrosity stopped screaming, and I heard Alex gargle. When I looked up, I saw blood dripping from his mouth, and I jumped to my feet. It took me half a second to realize what had happened. I stood there in shock as my eyes followed the blood dripping from his chain and onto a thin, pale arm. The arm was covered in slashes, and there were a few layers of skin missing. It also looked like the muscle on this forearm had been sliced thin, and yet it was strong enough to hold this heavy-looking blade. It was strong enough to move forward and stab my friend through his abdomen. I wanted to move. I wanted to run, but I saw the blade twist and the blood flowed out of my friend's shirt. I couldn't move. I could only stare in horror as Alex dry heaved and choked up blood, and the blade started slicing down. I heard a disgusting squelching and splattering noise as viscera left his body and fell to the ground. It was nothing like in the movies. They didn't fall cleanly out all at once. They slowly rolled out as if the scene was being played in slow motion. The abomination pulled its blade out, and Alex fell to the ground, face first into his own gore. "Go!" Trevor yelled as he pushed me back into reality. We couldn't stay there. I heard another scream, this one shorter, more metallic, and then the telltale sounds of chains and blades scratching the ground. I could also hear the disgusting noise of blood and organs being crushed by this thing's feet, and it dashed after us. As we reached the grim iron double doors, we extended our arms to push them open, only to slam harshly into them. They were locked. The doors could be opened from the other side, but they couldn't be opened from the inside. Whoever was keeping this monstrous, eldritch abomination of flesh and steel knew what they were doing. We'd been had. We didn't pull the brakes and slammed into the door like birds on a clean window. we were lucky we didn't break our fucking necks. Though, being lucky was the overstatement of the century, considering what was chasing us. I picked myself up first and helped Trevor, but there wasn't much distance between us and the creature. We needed to find a way out. Fortunately for us, it was deadly, but not fast. As I was screaming at Trevor, "What the fuck was that?" it flailed a chain at us and caught my wrist. I felt my bones shattered in my hand, and I howled in pain. I didn't have time to check if it was broken or not. We ran to another corner, hoping that the darkness would play to our advantage. Trevor and I hid behind two big machines that looked like meat grinders as the monstrous thing stopped running. I saw a flash of the eye in my mind again. Why did I feel like I knew that eye? It looked human, even with the wrong sclera color and discolored iris. I felt like I knew who was in that disgusting tin can. The thing inhaled deeply. It was so deep and loud that we heard it. Trevor put a hand over his mouth to control his breathing, but it served no purpose. It didn't want to hear us. It wanted to smell us. The smell of sweat and despair was sticking to us, and if that thing were only used to the smell of metal and blood, it would soon find us. And it did. It dashed toward us again, and I ran towards Trevor, hoping to catch his arm and run in the opposite direction. I was a hair too late. I saw that elongated arm reaching to him before me. It grabbed Trevor by the hoodie and pulled him up. Despite looking so sickly thin and scared, this arm had more strength than I had. It pulled Trevor up and to the meat grinder. I expected it to use the blade again, and so I tried to pull Trevor by his foot to bring him to my side of the machine, but it was too late. I heard the sound of blood splashing on the ground as the steel monstrosity turned on the meat grinder. I heard Trevor helplessly scream for me to help him as his arms were shoved into the blood-hungry machine. I could hear the skin detached from bone and vessels and bones being crushed. Despite the intensity of Trevor's screams, I tried to pull on his foot, but the abomination's grip on him was too strong. Half of Trevor's arm was gone by the time he passed out, but he woke up a second later as his elbow and the rest of his arm was pushed towards the machine. I heard him scream, cry, and I smelled piss and blood as his shoulder was sucked in. My eyes locked with the eyes of the monstrosity again, and I finally realized who it was. I didn't stay. I couldn't watch as Trevor's skull and brain were turned into minced meat, head cheese. I ran the length of the wall until I reached the double doors on the other side of the room. I was covered in my friend's blood and shocked by the realization that I knew who the abomination was. Through the double doors, I entered a refrigerated room. There were pigs' bodies on hooks, as well as many racks of questionably sliced meat on the side. I was relieved to see the doors could be locked from the inside, so I locked it. Then I moved one of the racks to block the door for added protection and to slow down the abomination. On the other side of the cold room was another set of double doors, but this one was locked. I could see through the small window another room that looked like the one I just came in, but cleaner, more hygienic, and with actual machines made for grinding meat. It was like I was looking in another dimension, but the right one. I tried to open the doors, to no avail. They were locked. I heard the creature slam its blades and chains against the double doors behind me, but I couldn't see him. There were no windows on the doors where I came from. I didn't know what time it was, but despite its strength, it couldn't open the doors. I heard it slam, scream, and slash at the doors for hours on end, and I sat on the ground and hid behind a rack, covering my ears. I prayed for every minute that passed that someone would come and rescue me. I didn't know how many hours passed, but by the time someone came, the blood on me had congealed, my shirt stuck to my skin, and I was freezing. It mustn't have been more than 40 degrees in that cold room, probably a little less. I was wearing nothing but jeans and a shirt, both of which were soaked in various fluids, mostly blood. I was brought to the nearest hospital and treated for hypothermia. I'd been in that freezer for 4 hours before someone found me. My clothes were taken and processed as evidence, and I was questioned relentlessly. The officers' tones were accusatory. I couldn't blame them. I was a kid who shoplifted and broke into a building at night. I wish they'd cut me some slack after what I went through. Plus, I told them everything they wanted to know, down to who the steel abomination was. It was Timmy, a friend I used to have a few years ago. When he disappeared, his parents left town and never came back. I was 100% certain it was him. I saw the officers talking with my parents through the large window of my hospital room. They had cuffed me to the bed, but I could move enough to turn and look at them. I saw my mother's horrified gaze as she looked at me. I couldn't hear what they were talking about, but a few minutes later, the officers came back into the room. The older of the two looked at me harshly, as the younger officer gave me a look that made me feel incredibly uncomfortable. It looked like pity. Were they finally going to act like I was a victim? Don't worry, everything's going to be fine, the younger officer said, but I could see the older officer's lip twitch. What the hell was going on? I thought. My mother left the hallway, and I saw my dad looking at me through the window. I felt like I was leaving my body. He looked so hurt. Your parents will contact a lawyer, the older officer sneered. My head was spinning, and a wave of nausea hit me. The door opened, and I heard my mother talk to my dad. I couldn't catch everything, but I understood about my coping mechanism, a therapy I did as a child, and how all of this had been buried. Don't worry, everything is going to be fine, Sam. I looked up at the younger officer. My eyes glossed over. I couldn't handle the stress. But I didn't kill my friends. It was Timmy, I screamed between sobs of salty tears. You have to go back. You have to find the machine. The young cop leaned in close to my face. Son, there was no one in the butcher shop. The butcher himself called us after his alarm went off. Nice man, he is too, as he is not going to press charges against you for breaking and entering. That kid, Timmy, that you are so up in arms about? They found that kid dead a year after he went missing. The officer left the room, and I was left to my fate. The butcher was smart, and the butcher was wise. He hid Timmy in a clever disguise. A dark closet in a dark apartment cloaked a machine so grim that the FBI and the cops could never find him. Tonight's stories, The Butcher Shop and The Perfect Cut, were written by Creepy Ghost Stories. He is a talented author and narrator. He is also a close personal friend of mine. If you have not checked out his channel, please do so. The links will be down in the description below. Also, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe, and ding that bell for all future content.
And remember, travelers, Once you step into my realm, there's no stepping out.